हेलो एवरीवन, वेरी गुड मॉर्निंग टू ऑल ऑफ यू। इस वीडियो में डिस्कस करेंगे चैप्टर नंबर सेकंड का पार्ट एंड जो क्लास 12 की हिस्ट्री है थीम 3 इसको हम डिस्कस करेंगे। लास्ट वीडियो में हमने यहाँ तक देख लिया था। अब देखेंगे जो तालुकदार थे। द डिस्पोसेशन ऑफ तालुकदार मीन दैट ब्रेकडाउन ऑफ एन एंटायर सोशल ऑर्डर। देन द टाइज ऑफ लॉयल्टी एंड पैट्रोनेज that had bound the peasant to तालुकदार was disrupted। वो भी टूट चुकी थी। एंड प्री ब्रिटिश टाइम में the तालुकदार was oppressor but many are also appeared to be generous father figure। बट पहले तालुकदार थोड़ी बहुत हम बोल सकते हैं उनके पीजेंट के साथ रिलेशन ठीक थे। they were exacted a variety of dues from the peasant but often were considered in the times of need। now under the British the peasant was directly exposed to over assessment ये लोग कर रहे थे of revenue and inflexible method of collection ये लोग यूज कर रहे थे। there was no longer any guarantee that in times of hardship या फिर क्रॉप फेलियर अगर आपकी हो गई तो आपसे रिवेन्यू कलेक्ट किया जाएगा फिर नहीं। क्रॉप फेलियर हो जाती तो ये लोग डिमांड कर रहे थे एंड स्टेट वुड रिड्यूस और कलेक्शन पोस्टपोन। बट ब्रिटिशर्स के टाइम में ऐसा कोई प्रोविजन नहीं था। और दैट इन टाइम्स फेस्टिविटीज द पीजेंट वुड गो टू द लोन्स गेट द लोन्स एंड सपोर्ट ऑफ द तालुकदार हैड अर्लियर प्रोवाइडेड। तो पहले इनको अच्छा खासा हम बोल सकते हैं सपोर्ट था बट लेटर ये भी चेंज उसका था। व्हाट तालुकदार थॉट, वो लोग क्या सोच रहे थे। एटीट्यूड ऑफ तालुकदार वाज बेस्ट एक्सप्रेस्ड बाय हनुमंत सिंह जो कि राजा ऑफ कलंकार नियर रायबरेली के आसपास। उन्होंने बताया है ड्यूरिंग द म्यूटिनी हनुमंत सिंह हैड गिवन शेल्टर टू ब्रिटिश ऑफिसर। ब्रिटिश ऑफिसर को इसने शेल्टर दी थी एंड conveyed him to safety। But while taking leave of the officer, Hanwant Singh told him, Sahib, your countrymen came into this country and drove out our king, and you sent your officers from the district to examine the titles of state. And at one blow you took from me the land from which the time immemorial had been my family। I submitted suddenly misfortune fell upon me। The people of the land rose against you, and you became to me whom you despoiled। I have saved you, but now I march at the head of my retainer to Lucknow and try to drive you from the country। And in areas like Awadh, जहाँ पे resistance during 1857 was intense and long lasting। यहाँ के लोगों ने बहुत अच्छा रेजिस्टेंस दिखाया था एंड द फाइटिंग वाज कैरिड आउट बाय तालुकदार एंड देयर पीजेंट। दोनों मिलकर लड़ रहे थे। मैनी ऑफ द तालुकदार वर लॉयल टू द नवाब बट बहुत सारे तालुकदार के नवाब ऑफ अवध के लिए रॉयल थे एंड दे जॉइन द बेगम हजरत महल जो कि वाइफ किसकी थी, नवाब की, लखनऊ में एंड फाइट की थी ब्रिटिशर्स के साथ एंड सम इवन रिमेन्ड विद हर डिफीट। The grievance of the peasant was carried out into the sepoy lines, since a vast majority of the sepoy were recruited from the village of Awadh. And for decades, the sepoy had complained of low levels of pay and difficulty of getting leaves। By 1850, there were other reasons for the discontent, and the relationship of the sepoy with their superior white officers underwent a significant change in the year preceding the uprising of 1857। And in the 1820, white officer made it point to maintain friendly relation with the sepoys। They would make, they would take part of their leisure activities। They wrestled with them, fenced with them, and went out hawking with them। Many of them were fluent in Hindustani and were familiar with the custom and culture of the country। And these officers were disciplinary and father figure rolled into one। ऐसा आपको देखने को मिलेगा 1840 में। This began to change। The officer developed a sense of superiority and started treating the sepoy in their racial inferior। मतलब जो इंडियन सिपोय थे उनको ये लोग इंफीरियर मान रहे थे। राइडिंग रफ्सो over their sensibilities। Abuse and physical violence became common and thus the distance between the sepoy and officer ये बढ़ी थी। Trust was replaced by suspicion। The episode of greased cartridge जो cartridge थी आपकी was a classical example of this। And it also important to remember that close link existed between sepoy and the rural world of the North India। Bengal sepoy in European style uniform, इंडियन है बट स्टाइल यू कैन सी। द लार्ज मेजोरिटी ऑफ द सिपोय ऑफ द बंगाल आर्मी रिक्रूट की जा रही थी विलेज ऑफ अवध से, ईस्टर्न यूपी से एंड मेनी ऑफ देम ब्राह्मण थे और अपर कास्ट के भी थे। अवध वाज इन फैक्ट कॉल्ड नर्सरी ऑफ बंगाल आर्मी। तो नर्सरी ऑफ बंगाल आर्मी अवध को बोल रही है। द चेंज दैट द फैमिलीज ऑफ द सिपोय सो अराउंड देम The threat they perceived were quickly transmitted to the sepoy lines. In turns, fear of the sepoy about a new cartridge, their grievance about leaves, their grudge about the increasing misbehavior, and racial abuse on the part of their white officers were communicated back to the village. This link between the sepoy and the rural world has important implication in the course of uprising. When the sepoy defied their superior officers and took them arms and were joined was swiftly by the preaching in the village. मतलब एकदम से वो against हुए हैं. Everywhere peasant proud into report into towns and join the soldiers and ordinary people. So the towns in collective act of rebellion में लोग उनके साथ. What the rebel wanted? Rebel से लोग क्या चाह रहे थे? As victorious, British recorded their own trials and tribulations as well as their heroism. They dismissed the rebels as a bunch of ungrateful and barbaric peoples. The repression of the rebels also mean silence of their voice. किनकी voice को हम silent कर देंगे. Then few rebels had the opportunity of recording their vision of events. Moreover, most of them were sepoy and ordinary people who were not illiterate. Sorry, who were not literate. Thus, other than a few proclamation, that is istihar. इश्तिहार किसके लिए होता है? नोटिफिकेशन. याद रखना है. Issued by rebel leaders to propagate their ideas and persuade people to join the revolt. We do not have much that throw light on the perspective of rebels. Attempt to reconstruct what happened in 1857 and thus was heavily and inevitably dependent on what British wrote. While these sources reveal the minds of the officials, they tell us very little about what rebel wanted. द विजन ऑफ यूनिटी क्या था कि हम इसको जो रिबेलियन था या फिर यूनिटी इकट्ठी करके हम क्या करेंगे आगे के लिए. रिबेल प्रोक्लेमेशन क्या था 1857 का? रिपीटेडली अपील्ड ऑल सेक्शन ऑफ द पॉपुलेशन इरेस्पेक्टिव ऑफ देयर कास्ट एंड क्रीड से, या कोई भी हो इसको ज्वाइन कीजिए. मेनी ऑफ द प्रोक्लेमेशन वर इश्यूड बाय मुस्लिम प्रिंसेस और इन देयर नेम्स, बट इवन these took care to address some types of Hindus. The rebellion was seen as a war in such both Hindu and Muslim had equally लॉस और गेन. आपको एक साथ ही मिलेगा एंड एक साथ आप जो भी आप खो रहे हो तो आप दोनों खो रहे हो. इस्तिहार hark back to the prehistory Hindu Muslim past and glorifies the coexistence of different community under Mughal Empire. बताया कि मुगल एम्पायर में सभी लोग इकट्ठे रह रहे थे. Then proclamation has issued that was issued under the name of Bahadur Shah Zafar के नाम पे appealed that people to join the fight under the standard of both Muhammad and Mahavir. It was remarkable that during the uprising, religious division between the Hindu and Muslim were hardly noticeable despite British attempt to create such divisions. In Bareilly, in Western UP, 1857, British spent 50,000 to incite the Hindu population against the Muslim, but the attempt was failed. अब यहाँ पे आजमगढ़ प्रोक्लेमेशन 25 अगस्त 1857. This was main source of our knowledge about what the rebellion wanted. जो रिबेलियन में तो ये अंग्रेजी लोग बोले, बट हमारे लिए तो ये फ्रीडम फाइटर हम बोल सकते हैं. इट वाज well known to all that this in the age people of Hindustan, both Hindus and Mohammedans, were being ruined under the tyranny and oppression of the infilled and treacherous English. And it is therefore the bounden duty of all the wealthy people of India, especially those who are any sort of connection with Mohammedan royal families and are considered the patrons and masters of their people, to stake their lives and property for well-being of the people. Then several of the Hindu and Musliman chiefs who have long since acquitted their homes for their preservation of their religion and have been trying their best to root out the English in India and have presented themselves to me and taken part of their reigning Indian crusade, and it is more than probably that shall very shortly receive succors of the West from the West, and therefore the formation of public present istihar consisting of several sections is put in the circulation and imperative duty of all to take in their careful consideration and abide by it. Parties anxious to participate in the common cause but having no means to provide for themselves shall receive their daily subsistence from me, and be it known to all that the ancient work both Hindus and Mohammedans the writing of miracle worker and the circulation of the astrologers. Pandit all agrees in asserting that the English was no longer putting off the Indians elsewhere. Therefore, in invent on all, give up the hope of continuation of the British. Not so important. छोड़ सकता अब इसको. एक मिनट. Regarding जमींदार के बारे में क्या कहा है? It is evident that the British government in making जमींदारी settlement have imposed exorbitant जुम्माज, जिसको क्या बोलते हैं revenue demand, and have been disgraced and ruined several जमींदार by putting up their estate for common or public auction and heirs of the rent. In so much, the institution of suit by common royal, maid servant or a slave, respectable zamindar are summoned into the court, arrested, and put in the gaols and disgraced. In litigation regarding the zamindar, the immense value of stamps and other unnecessary expense of the civil court are all calculated to impoverish the litigants. Beside this, coffers of the zamindar are annually taxed with a subscription of schools, hospital, roads. Such exhaustion will have no manner of existence in the Badshah government. कि बादशाह के टाइम में ऐसा कुछ नहीं था. And but on the contrary of Jummas, it will be the light, dignity, and honor of the zamindar state. Every zamindar will have absolute rule in their own zamindar. Then regarding merchant के बारे में क्या कहा है? It is plain that the infield and the tricorious British गवर्नमेंट है मोनोपोलाइज द ट्रेड को मोनोपोलाइज कर लिया है सभी वैल्यूएबल मर्चेंडाइज का, जैसे इंडिगो, क्लॉथ, अदर आर्टिकल ऑफ शिपिंग, लिविंग ओनली ट्रेड ऑफ ट्राइफल्स टू द पीपल ऑफ इंडिया. Beside this, profit of the traders were taxed with postage, tolls, the subscription for schools. Notwithstanding all the concession, the merchant are liable to imprison and disgraceful at the instance of complaint of worthless men. When the Badshah government is established, all these aforesaid fraudulent practice will be dispensed with, and trade of every article, without exception, both by land and water, will be open to the native merchant of India. It is therefore the duty of every merchant to take part in the war and the aid जो कि Badshah government, his man and money उनके लिए था. Then section 3 regarding public servant के बारे में क्या कहा है? It is not a secret thing that the under British government native employed in civil and military service have little respect. कि native लोगों को अच्छी पोस्ट भी नहीं मिल रही है, उनको respect भी इतनी नहीं थी. Low पे था, no manner of influence, and all the post of dignity both in the department are exclusive. किसके लिए थी? इंग्लिशमैन के लिए. Therefore all the natives in the British service ये सिर्फ आपके हम बोल सकते हैं लॉयल थे एंड छोटी पोस्ट पे थे. बादशाही गवर्नमेंट obtain salaries of 200 से 300 rupees for a month for present and entitled high post in the future. बादशाह के टाइम में थोड़ा अच्छा है, ऐसा बोल रहे हैं. सेक्शन 4 में रिगार्डिंग आर्टिसंस के बारे में क्या होता है? इट इज एविडेंट that the Europeans by the introduction of English article into India have thrown the weaver, जो काम करने वाली कम्युनिटी थी उनको बाहर निकाल दिया. कॉटन डिजर्वर, कारपेंटर, ब्लैक स्मिथ, शू मेकर out of the employ and have engrossed their occupation, so that every description of native artisans has been reduced to beggary. But under the Badshah government, the native artisans will exclusively be employed in the service of king, the Raja, and the rich will no doubt ensure their prosperity. Therefore, these artisans ought to renounce the English service. Section 5 में regarding पंडित के बारे में बताया है. Fakir and other land person. The Pandit and the Fakir, being the guardians of Hindu and Mohammedan religions respectively, and European, being the enemy of both the religion, दोनों religion के लोग बोल सकते हैं दुश्मन हैं. And at present a war is raging against the Englishmen on account of religions के बेस पे हम बोल सकते हैं लोग वॉर करेंगे and to protect their religion also. सिपोही क्या सोच रहे थे? This is one of the अर्जी जो कि पेटिशन होती है of rebellion that have survived. A century ago, British arrived in Hindustan. हिंदुस्तान में 101 साल पहले ये लोग आए हैं, समान रहे थे. Gradually entertained the troops in their service and became master of every state. हर जगह के लोग मास्टर बने हुए. Our forefathers have always served them. हमारे पूर्वजों ने इनको सर्व किया है. Also entered their service and by the mercy of God and with their assistance, the British has conquered every place and their life. जो भी उनको अच्छा लगा उन्होंने यहाँ पे हथिया ली. With thousands of us, Hindustan men were sacrificed. बट वी नेवर मेड एनी एक्सक्यूज एंड नो रिवोल्ट, अभी तक हमने कुछ नहीं किया था. बट ईयर 1857 द ब्रिटिश इश्यूड एन ऑर्डर, जहाँ पे न्यू कार्ट्रीज आ चुकी है, मस्केट, ये सब, जहाँ पे काउ और पिक का वो सब है. एंड आफ्टर में क्या आपका बोन डस्ट. सो अब हमें हर कोई डिस्टर्ब है उनके रेजिमेंट ऑफ इन्फेंट्री, कैवलरी और आर्टिलरी, एंड दे गेव दीज कार्ट्रीज टू द सोवार्स, जो कि सोल्जर थे, एंड थर्ड लाइट कैवलरी, एंड ऑर्डर देम टू बाइट देम, कि आप इससे मुंह से खोलना पड़ेगा. एंड ट्रूपर्स ने ऑब्जेक्ट किया है इसको खोलने से, एंड सेड दैट दे वुड नेवर बाइट देम, एंड फॉर इट इफ दे डिड रिलीजन एंड फेथ वुड बी डिस्ट्रॉयड, इससे इनका धर्म भ्रष्ट हो जाएगा. अपॉन दिस ब्रिटिश ऑफिसर paraded the three regiment, and having prepared, so thus English soldiers and other battalion of European troops and horse artillery surrounded them and placed 6 guns before each of the infantry regiment, loaded the gun with grape and made 84 troopers prisoner and put them into jail. उनको जेल में डाल दिया. Then the region that the sowars of the cantonment इन्होंने put into jail, we should be frightened into biting new cartridge. उसकी वजह से, on this account we and all our countrymen having united together have fought the British for preservation of our faith. अपने धर्म के लिए हमें लड़ना पड़ेगा. We have seen compelled to make war for 2 years for the Raja and chief, and who are within us faith and religions, and still having undergone sort of, and we have fought our 2 years in order to faith the religion polluted. If the religion of Hindu and Muslim is lost, इस दुनिया में क्या बचेगा? Then against the symbol of oppression, the proclamation completely rejected everything associated with ब्रिटिश रूल और फिरंगी राज, इनसे रिलेटेड जो भी चीज है उसको हम बॉयकॉट करेंगे इस टाइप से. दे कंडेम द ब्रिटिश फॉर द annexation they had carried out and the treaties they had broken. The British, the rebel leader said, would not be trusted. What enraged the peoples was how British land revenue settlement has disposed landlord, both big and small, and the foreign commerce and driven artisans and weaver to ruin. Every aspect of British rule was attacked, and the Firangi accused of destroying a way of life that was familiar and cherished. The rebel wanted to restore the proclamation expressed the widespread fear that British were bent on destroying the caste and religion of Hindu and Muslim and convert करना चाह रहे हैं उनको Christianity. A fear that people to believe many of the rumors that circulate at the time. People were argued to come together and fight to save their livelihood, their faith, their honor, their identity, and greater public good के लिए लोग लड़ रहे. As noted earlier, in many places of the rebellion against the British widened into attack on all those who were seen allies of British or local oppressor. जो भी उनके साथ थे उनके ऊपर अटैक किया है. Often the rebel deliberately sought to humiliate the elite of a city. In the village, they burned the account book, ransacked moneylender house. This reflect an attempt to overturn traditional hierarchies, rebel against all oppressor, जो भी इनको दबाना चाह रहे थे. It represent a glimpse of an alternative vision, perhaps a more egalitarian society वो लोग चाह रहे थे. Such vision are not articulated in the proclamation which sought to unify all the social group and fight against Firangi Raj. फिर ये लोग सोच रहे थे कि अल्टरनेट पावर हम कहां से लेके आएंगे. वंस ब्रिटिश रूल अगर कोलैप्स हो जाएगा, द रिबेल इन प्लेस लाइक दिल्ली, लखनऊ एंड कानपुर ट्राई करेंगे स्टैब्लिश सम काइंड ऑफ स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ अथॉरिटी की एंड एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन वो लोग करना चाह रहे थे. दिस वाज ऑफ कोर्स शॉर्ट लिव्ड था, बट अटेम्प्ट शो दैट द रिबेल लीडरशिप wanted to restore the pre-British world of the 18th century, and the leader went back to the culture of court. Then appointment were made various post arrangement made the collection of land revenue and payment of the troops, order issued to stop loot and plunder. And side by side, plans were made to fight battle against the British. Chains of command were laid down in the army, and in all this, rebel harked back to 18th century. Mughal world, जो कि एक world that became symbol of all that have been lost. The administrative structure established by the rebels were primarily aimed at meeting the demands of war. Then, however, most cases these structures could not survive the British onslaught, but in Awadh, resistance the British lasted longer. सबसे ज़्यादा अवध ने ही resistance किया है. And plans of counter attack were being drawn up by the लखनऊ कोड एंड हायरार्की ऑफ द कमांड वर इन प्लेस लास्ट 1857 से लेके 1858। सो इस चैप्टर में इस वाले पार्ट में हम इतना ही रखेंगे, पार्ट 3 में हम इसको कंप्लीट करेंगे। राइट नाउ आई हैव टू गो समवेयर, सो वी विल डिस्कस इन द नेक्स्ट पार्ट। तो डिप्रेशन से लेके एंड ये सारा कुछ हम नेक्स्ट चैप्टर में देखने वाले, नेक्स्ट पार्ट। So for today, this was only. Thank you.